Amen. Hasn't the missions conference already been a blessing? It's just begun, and my heart is already stirred for what God has done. I love the theme this year, stewarding the gospel and what God has done over the last 30 years. As our pastor has already mentioned before, that the story of kind of him resisting a little bit, going to Honduras, and Brother Tate had asked him, and finally when God gave him the liberty to visit Honduras, God began to stir in his heart and open his eyes towards a greater impact to all of not just Honduras, but Central America. As he recounted that it was Honduras alone that recognized its history and its connection with the other four Central American countries, as represented by the 5 stars in the Honduran flag. These 5 stars represent the countries of El Salvador, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Guatemala, and of course, Honduras as the central middle star. God began to reveal the impact that could be made by creating a training center, or if you will, a hub by which we could expand our reach into these other countries. Our method is to, number one, educate and train. We wanted to reach out in that manner of education and training individuals for the ministry or for those who are already in the ministry to help them further the impact in their own communities. Also, not just education or training, but our desire was to create a location by which we could equip ministries by providing whole Bibles, New Testaments, gospel tracts, books, and Christian resources, tablets, leather-bound study Bibles for the pastors and those in full-time ministry. Church, you got to understand, it's one thing to educate and to train a pastor on how he can have a greater impact in their communities. But it's another thing altogether to realize the economic status of most of these countries. The level of poverty that many of these countries face on a daily basis would be overwhelming for any of us. The day-to-day struggle, just trying to make enough to last just a few more days, trying to find work, make a consistent living can be an extreme challenge in itself. Just as an example, just one leather-bound Thompson Chain Study Bible that we last conference gave out to all the pastors, it might cost a pastor an entire month's wages just to own something of that quality. It's because of those reasons that we have to understand, unless we provide the resources and unless we equip them with the tools they need, their ministries will never have the impact that they can now have because of the sacrifices of God's people here in the States. So in 2016, we hosted our first pastors training conference in Danlí, Honduras, located at Iglesia Bautista Belén, or Bethlehem Baptist Church. The first team that went was comprised of 4 of us, Pastor Smith, Pastor Kirshner, myself, and Brother Tilton. And of course, working with our very own missionary, the Tate family. We love them so dearly. Their family have labored over 20 years in Honduras. We also worked with the missionary Alan Jackson and his dear wife. As you can imagine, there was a lot of preparations that went into this first endeavor, as do all of our mission outreaches. And we were, of course, praying for a great impact. But what God did through the first meeting, I think, was beyond all of our expectations. It seemed to have sparked a revival, a stirring among the hearts of the men that were in attendance, not just from the Hondurans, but from the neighboring countries as well. We had nearly 100 pastors in that first year's attendance. The pastors that were there later testified something. They said they were unsure of what to expect. And honestly, they assumed it would be just like any other pastors' conference that they had attended before. But as the first day began to unfold, they started realizing that this was a much different meeting that they had ever attended. The lessons that were taught were practical and helpful and instructive in nature. They began to realize that we actually were there because we cared for them. and we legitimately wanted to help them. I'll never forget, then the resources were revealed. And they saw stacks of books and materials and thousands of gospel tracts and as many boxes of New Testaments that they could carry home with them. As Pastor began to explain, all these resources are free to you, but they're not free. Said they cost a great deal, as many of God's people from the United States and our home church sacrificed so they, the people of Central America, could have these resources at no cost to them. The response, as you can imagine, varied quite a bit. Most of the men just shouted amen. There were some who just sat there and began to weep. And I remember some with no expression at all. They just sat there dumbfounded of what they just heard, trying to comprehend. Why? Because you have to understand, church, nothing like this had ever been done for these pastors, ever. They were so grateful. They were so overwhelmed by the generosity of the churches in the States. This meeting in 2016 had laid the foundation for what was going to transpire for the years to come. In 2017, aside from our normal sessions and providing materials, we also had an evangelistic team from our church go with us to work with the local ministries from Honduras with a focused effort in the local schools. We worked directly with these school principals and scheduled times for every day for our teams to enter these local schools, and in order to provide Bibles, in order to provide gospel tracts for all the students there as well as the teachers. They also split up into smaller teams and went into classroom by classroom, singing, doing object lessons, presenting the gospel to each classroom. We saw dozens of children come to the knowledge of Christ that day, that week. On Thursday, the last day of our conference, there was one more large evangelistic outreach in the schedule. It was a nearby town called El Paraiso, the population of around 25,000. We had over 150 pastors there gathered that year for the conference, and we gathered at the church and began to pray over thousands of gospel tracts. We're going to transport over 250 people in total, including our group and local ministries, over to the town of El Paraiso. And although I think we could have probably just used one pickup truck to transport all those people, we did use multiple buses. The idea was, of course, knocking on every single door and sharing the gospel person to person. Well over 100 people received Christ that day. Along with the tracts, there was a personal invitation to a new church in their hometown that was going to be started that Sunday. The pastor was already ready. The pastors were so inspired of seeing this and captured a vision of what is actually possible and what could be duplicated in their own communities. By the way, there was over 80 first-time visitors in attendance that first Sunday. And that church that was birthed by the collective efforts of God's people is still in existence today. They now own their own property and are in the process of finishing their new auditorium. 2018 was the year that our church was able to provide a tablet for each pastor. These were custom tablets specifically ordered for this conference. Pastor Kirshner was on the phone and working directly with the manufacturer to have them configured to exactly what we needed, which is amazing in and of itself. The tablet was then loaded with specific applications to help them in the ministry, as well as over 1,100 different Christian resources that were downloaded on that tablet and made available at the push of a button. As Pastor Kirshner began to present this new tool to be used in the ministry, they all kind of sat there looking at him holding this tablet, not really sure where he was going. And he began to explain, we have one for each of you. Man, they were so excited. There were shouts that day. Understanding something like this was provided for them was overwhelming. By the way, just not too long ago, my son and I had the privilege to go to Nicaragua to teach in a short music conference this past year. And the host pastor showed us his tablet. He still had his tablet. He was still using it every week for sermon preparation. And his son used it to load up songs and used it to lead music. That year, we passed out those tablets. We also had another evangelistic outreach in the local schools and saw many more young people make a decision for Christ. In 2019, the highlight of that year, at the end of the conference, we had another mass evangelistic outreach and had over 300 individuals spread out all over Don Lee sharing the gospel, inviting them to a special service held at a local stadium that we had rented out. Every visitor who showed up would be able to receive a New Testament for themselves. It was amazing because we had over 1,500 people in attendance that evening. During the song service, we had our very own 200-voice pastor's choir. They sang Victory in Jesus. We flew in a guest speaker that year, Pastor Gil Torres, who preached an amazing spirit-filled message, and it really captured their attention the entire time. And at the invitation, there was over 100 decisions made that year. The pastors in attendance, by the way, were the ones who were able to deal with all those people who came forward to the invitation, which further impacted their ministries by continuing to expand the vision that God had given them and the possible impact that they themselves could have where they live. As the years passed, and God continued to grow the impact that our church was having in Central America, God began dealing with my family concerning Honduras as well and the ministry needs. Several years back, God had provided over 8 acres that needed to be developed into the training center. There had been construction of several buildings, 2 dormitories and a dining hall. The pastor saw the need to have all of the activities, all of the sessions, all of the services, as well as housing all of the pastors in one location. And that's what we were working towards in this development. It would create a unity. It would create a continuity to what was trying to be accomplished there at the conference. In 2020, God had made clear his call on my family and gave us liberty to start the process of transitioning our family to Honduras for the purpose of becoming an extension of faith. God revealed to pastor and our family that if we were going to see what needed to be accomplished there on that property, we're going to need someone on the ground to help realize the vision and to see that vision become a reality. The Tates, having been there already 20 years, he and his family was already very occupied with the ministries, the institute that he was teaching in full time, as well as the other ministries that God had already given their family. And there wasn't any way he would be able to take on the development of this property as well, which is why God called our family. In the last 2.5 years since we've been gone, by God's grace, we've seen further the development of the inside of the dining hall. Both cabins were finished and an open-air auditorium was constructed. Church, you have to remember, the use and impact with this property is limited to the development of the property and facility. Because of the continued development of the training center, 2022 was the first year we were able to host the entire conference at Faith Baptist Training Center. By the way, this last year was the 3rd year of hosting on our property, and it was the greatest pastors' conference yet. The Spirit was amazing. The pastors were all so grateful. There was a spirit of thankfulness there. And part of the excitement, as verbalized from the pastors, was the continued development of the training center. They showed up that year and saw more development and how it was cleaned up and even more available for them, and that excited them. Aside from the pastors' conference, we've hosted men's meetings, we've hosted ladies' meetings there on the property. We've joined efforts with the police in hosting a children's day that they have every single year, where we had games and activities and preached and presented the gospel, seeing many young people come to know Christ. This January, we're going to host our very first youth camp. Brother Tate and I are also in the planning stages of hosting a community outreach there on the property for those, our neighbors right there in the area, where we're going to host an activity day and invite all of our neighbors out to the property and have a day of food and fun, something that they have never seen. Wow. Everything always costs something, but can you imagine showing up on the property and having hot dogs and chips and drinks, as well as games for all the kids and prizes, and of course for those who stay for the service at the end, we'll also get a Bible. Would you pray for that? Yes. Pray for that development, that evangelistic outreach. Faith Baptist Training Center continues to be a go-to source for Bibles and tracts. Our military and police ministries continue to grow, where not only do we get to go every week and preach to the Presidential Guard, but both the military and the police come on our property to load their vehicles with boxes of Bibles. It's incredible what God is doing there in Honduras. I want you to know, church, that you made a difference. Your sacrifice has made a difference. Because of this conference, because of the work that has started back in 2016, 3 churches have been started as a result of this that we know of. One young man from Nicaragua came that first year, and God used the conference to call him to the pastorate. He's now pastoring in Nicaragua. Hundreds of souls have been saved because of the results and efforts in Honduras. Hundreds of thousands of Bibles and tracts have been distributed all over Honduras and Central America. It has helped inspire, as was already mentioned, the work in Mexico that is going on, which now Mexico has inspired more conferences that want to be held in South America. Your investment has made a difference. What do we need right now? There's 2 major needs. I don't think that the conference will stop developing over the years, but what we have right now as immediate needs, number 1, we need equipment. Pastor and I have already discussed the fact that we need our own equipment. We need a backhoe. There's so much dirt work that needs to be done, drainage ditches, construction, leveling fields, and continuing with the ball fields. We have to have equipment, and weed whackers, chainsaws, all sorts of equipment. The other need that we have is we have to expand above the dining hall. We need to take that dining hall and bring it up and make one more floor. If we could do that, that would provide so much more classroom settings. We would immediately be able to get the institute students and the whole institute out onto the property, and they would have classroom space, and they would have small auditorium space. We would have availability for the conferences for more dormitory rooms. That is our next step. That would find a solution for many of our needs as the first step. So as you pray and as you continue to give, I want you to know your sacrifice is not in vain. We'll never know the impact that we have made in all of these countries around, not just Honduras, but Central America and Mexico and now South America. There has been an impact, and souls have been changed, lives have been changed. As our pastor has said so many times before, when we help a pastor, that pastor can in turn help his people. And if you would ask me, what is the purpose of this Faith Baptist Training Center? It is to impact lives, those who are Christians, to enrich them, to reach out in evangelistic outreach, gathering the community in ways that maybe they have never seen before, and presenting the gospel, seeing as many souls saved for His glory and for His honor. Thank you. Thank you is not enough, but thank you anyways. Thank you for your sacrifice. It goes very much noticed. We appreciate you.